All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Energy Market Update. Special welcome to any of our channel partners able to make it on the call today. Very busy week for energy stories, although a quieter week for prices compared to what we've seen over the past couple of weeks. But before we get to that, that's me, John Vieira, on the left. We got our trusty legal disclaimer on the right, and following the normal agenda of natural gas fundamentals, market news, weather, and then ending with market data. So for natural gas fundamentals, we had an estimate of 11 to 15 being put into the ground. Again, these numbers have been very low, south of 50, not in the high double digits, definitely not in the triples. And we've seen that start to eat into the storage story. And the important thing is this is kind of the weight on top of all the other bullish stories out there that have kind of kept a lid on prices for now. It is a slow moving story. Right now, we do have plenty of gas, but this amount can change very quickly. So for today's number, it came out at 22, which could be some of the makeup from last week. There was a big miss below, over 10 BCF. This one, a miss on the upside, so slightly bearish on today. However, looking at where we were compared to last year in the 5-year average, so we're down to 249 above last year, which was at 250 last week, and we're down to 456 above the 5-year average, and that's really the important number. And last week we were at 465. Now, not too long ago, that number was close to 700. So it shows quickly how that can drop. And what we mean by that is if we take a look on the picture, we can see where the green arrows indicated where we currently are with the blue line. And we are still just above that min-max, the light gray shaded area. But as we continue, if we continue to drop into the gray, that builds the upward pressure on prices. We get anywhere close to that dark gray line, we're going to be in a different place for prices altogether, with them being much higher if that storage story changes drastically. And with the low prices of gas we have right now, we're seeing production leases run out. So this could be a perfect storm of the hot summer, long hot summer, into finally a really cold winter, and that storage changing right before we get there. And that would send prices really high, especially for ice in the New England, the Northeast, down through the Mid-Atlantic and PJM. For this week, again, not too big of a number for the estimate right now, although it is very early, 24 to 44, looking to be put into storage. Not too much updated on this chart, just kind of where we're at. We've seen the production come off a little bit since the beginning of the year. We're not expecting that orange line to grow drastically as we move into the future. So again, supply kind of being around the same steady state, a little up, a little bit down. On the other hand, we're expecting the LNG exports to greatly increase. We, on our internal call last week, discussed how the LNG pause has at least been put on hold in the courts so that those can resume. That already that the current administration said was only going to be a pause, while the courts have at least got rid of that for now. And Department of Energy Secretary Granholm said that, I mean, they have 40 to 48 BCF worth of permits for new sites over the next several years. So this number could be greatly growing for exports. So for exporting the LNG and not producing more, we're going to have a net loss of LNG. Less supply puts that upward pressure on those outside years. And where is it going? And if you need prices, please reach out for those. But just in general, it's going to National Balancing Point in the UK. The title transfer facility over in the EU is the benchmark, and the JKM, the Japan Korean marker, which has been widening. So we might be sending some more energy in that direction as well. And for our channel partners on the call especially, this is the updated version for July. And the big difference was on the y-axis. On the June forecast, it only went up to 10. Now it goes up till 12. So although the arrows might look smaller, the amount that they reach up to are now closer to 10. So the risk grew on the outside years, where the red arrow really didn't make much of a change. So that risk is continuing to increase on those outside years for movement up versus movement down. And this is what we want to apply to our regional charts. Taking a look at the market news. Political noise is getting very loud, a lot of happenings going on. And again, just remember that we are politically agnostic. We're looking to how exactly this is going to affect supply and demand, and what's that going to do for purchasing strategy and the impact on prices. So former President Trump is now the official nominee for Republican candidate for the president, and he has added JD Vance to his ticket. During his RNC address to accept the nomination, he did veer a bit further right than he had been, kind of going into the drill baby drill. and that would be, support of fossil fuels, and then going into the execution of the current green transition being pushed by the Biden administration and calling it the Green New Scam. So a little bit bolder in the wording around that. And his platform aligns pretty closely to JD Vance's platform regarding energy policy. And some political analysts have it that JD Vance could push him a little bit further right than the recent rhetoric that we just heard at the RNC convention. On the other hand, we have the presumptive nominee in Kamala Harris right now at the moment. We do not have a vice president yet, and we're looking to see who she picks as candidate and how her campaigns goes to be more telling. Prior to her being VP, she was a very regarded by many by her track record as a very liberal senator. And in 2019, by one of the companies that track the politician, is actually a liberal website, bestowed on her the most liberal candidate of 2019. So one thing that we had thought about before the Biden versus Trump election of 2020 was, they seem to be a lot closer together than they actually ended up acting on. Biden was probably the closest to the center of all the other candidates running, and then really kind of changed course after taking office with the XL pipeline being canceled on day one and some other steps he's taken during his term in office. So our question is, it seems like Kamala Harris would, at least if she wins and gets the nomination and get put in office, would at least stay the course, and more than likely we would probably go a little bit further left on that. So our real conclusion is all the events and all the noise that have been going on is really that the two parties seem to have moved further apart on their energy policy. So we need to be ready to talk about the scenarios to the purchasing strategy with clients of what the outcome of this will be. We also have the wrench of this Chevron deference, and we're going to cover that after we get through the global stories. And in regard to the current term underneath the Biden administration, on Sunday, we know that he gave up his bid for running for a second term in office. However, on Monday, was right back at it with his administration, the EPA rolling out another $4.3 billion to climate grants. This money is funded by the IRA. And one of the points from the top story is this is the IRA that was the tiebreaker where the VP votes. So Harris voted to approve the Inflation Reduction Act that put upwards of $69 billion towards the green energy transition and climate change. So huge amounts of money about what that would go in the order, and it really is going to depend, do things get built or not. We've talked at length about the wind projects off both ISO New England and the NYSERDA markets and the challenges they have faced thus far, especially with the higher cost of inflation and interest rates. So this money went to 25 projects around the country, and they were very varied. Solar panels, smart services, increasing electric bike fleets, getting people to share rides in cars more often, electrifying buildings, weatherization, and retrofitting projects. So a lot of different ways this money is going to be spent. And there was 300 applicants that were vetted and almost decided upon that totaled $33 billion. So we could see more money being pushed in that direction if the demand is there and Democrats win in the election cycle. So again, noise is going to be getting louder. We want to boil it down to supply and demand and the actions that are either proposed or enacted by who's making policy. And also that we don't expect any slowdown to any of these any of things that the Biden administration has been carrying out since the beginning of their term. And then just an update on a story we've been following since April. It's been dubbed the Clean Power Plan 2.0, and it's been a tug of war between the agencies. And it's called 2.0 because underneath President Obama, a lot of his agencies in the executive branch tried incorporating similar rules of reducing emissions from fossil fuel fired plants. Now, this is a wider suite of rules that also look into ash from coal ash and things like that. But really, the rule here we're focusing on is emission from natural gas and coal-fired plants. So a lot of people took EPA to court saying, we can't put these in place now. We're asking for a stay because of immediate and irreparable harm. However, the deadlines for a lot of these rules don't really get teeth till 2028, 2030, 2032. Although it may affect decisions now, because if their power plants aren't going to be profitable in the next year or two, maybe I'll take my money and go somewhere else. So seeing that pressure on coal plants to shut down because they are at the head of the target of these rules, with fossil fuels having a little bit more leeway with the retrofitting. Technically, you could retrofit some of these coal plants, but it's very uneconomic. It doesn't seem like a reasonable step forward for those plants. So this all is going to go boil back down, and we're going to cover in length after we do the global stories, but the Chevron deference is now struck down. So the ability for the EPA to even make these rules in the first place might have been an overreach of power. So that's going to be a long overreaching story of what we're going to be looking for uncertainty. So one of the things is, because that put 19,000 agency rules up in the air, because basically under President Obama, his agency started putting these rules in place. Under President Trump, he started pulling back all of what President Obama did. Then under President Biden, then we get the Clean Power Plan 2.0 rolled out in April underneath the EPA. And a lot of laws are supposed to be either made in Congress from the legislative branch or explicitly defined as mandates for the agencies to have power over. And that's what the crux of the issue is right now in the courts. Taking a look at some of the global stories, still worried about, is the temperature getting hotter or colder? The closer we get to peace, the less supply issues that we're going to have, the worse it gets, the more problems we could have going around the world. And unfortunately, we're kind of starting to see an interweaving of Iran, Russia, and China versus the US and the West. And since a lot of the clean energy transition runs through China at the moment, and we talked about a few weeks ago how at the G7 meeting, they said that, we need to find another supply route because it's not going to work through China. We're putting ourselves at risk because they could cut it off at any time, which they've already done with some parts. When we fought about computer chips in August of 23, they cut those off in August, they dropped to zero. And they could do the same thing surrounding the materials and refined materials and products needed for the green energy transition. Also, we have the shipping concerns of going through the areas, the bodies of water surrounding the conflicts going on in the Middle East that all started with the Hamas attack on Israel and now the widening conflict that we see. And then in regards to a path to peace, last week, the unicameral body of Israel, the Knesset, voted against the creation of a Palestinian state. So that prospect for peace seems to be dead in the water for the time being. And then we had President Netanyahu come to speak to the US Congress, and we had some Democrats protesting and skipping the meeting. And Vice President Harris said she had another engagement already. Was supposed to follow up by meeting with Netanyahu. But it could be telling of which way and what chances for peace we have going forward, depending on how our election cycles go. So that's just kind of the takeaway. It's not about who likes what or not. It's just, are things going to get better around the world and the supply issues go away, or are they going to get worse? And just on the story of that Clean Power Plan 2.0 and PJM. So in PJM, coal is still a big supplier of electricity. So this is from the other day. It shows that coal is the third biggest supplier of electricity in the area. And then on the right side, indicated by the green arrow, as soon as that announcement came out, all the outside years went up. And as we can see over time, they're still slanted going up much more into the future. But when that announcement first came out, these outside years following 28 through 32, every time one of those new rules was enacted, they were much higher. So something we keep an eye on. We'll see if it stays in place. It's going to depend on who wins the election that's upcoming, and also how the Chevron deference being struck down is going to be viewed in the courts. Taking a look over at Russia, big story with just particularly in energy. We keep having strikes escalate on both sides on energy sites. We now have the EU refusing to support Hungary, who's kind of been acting out against the EU and seeming to be in more of a partnership with Russia, because sanctions enacted by the Ukraine are preventing oil from flowing into Hungary and Slovakia. So essentially, the EU has to, Hungary wanted the EU to concede to them to let Russian oil come through to them, so they pay Russia in order to donate funds to the Ukraine from the EU. So it'll be more money going to both sides. So that still is an issue right now. We'll see how that materializes. And then we also we see China and Russia just holding joint naval drills that we talked about last week. And now they're flying planes that breach American airspace, as Biden was given his address the other night, that were intercepted. So again, unfortunately, the temperature seems to be growing, and that could cause more strain on the supply issues around the world. And since a lot of, again, the green energy movement is running through China right now, any of these other conflicts could affect the relationship of those parts that we need if we're going to continue along this path at this pace. And also down in the left corner, we have last week the Baltic states basically saying, we're leaving the Russian energy grid and we're going to join the EU energy grid. So that was also a big story. So a lot of very energy centric stories other than a lot of the other news that's out there. Taking a look at China, the big story is still the tariffs that the US implemented on China, a lot of them to do with energy products because we want to be competitive here, and they're basically running the marketplace right now, and then the EU joining us after the US continued to pressure them. Now we also have the EU looking at putting more tariffs on biofuels coming from China that they feel that they're flooding the market with. So it could end up being a tit for tat of back and forth with the tariffs, which could make everything more expensive, and we're worried about the energy products. And then spinning China back into Iran, Iran, who's backing Hamas, and Hamas is Palestinian, and Hamas and Fatah are both Palestinian rival factions, but China just brokered, I wouldn't necessarily a peace agreement, but an agreement to form a joint government together. So that would show the sphere of influence growing in the Middle East from China, and then being on the opposite side of Israel, which could put the U.S. at odds with China, and therefore, again, that supply of the green energy pieces that we need, minerals, refined minerals, and the finished products. So for our channel partners on the call, we've covered this several times. We're going to keep on this story because this is one of the biggest stories out there of why consumers and why our clients need an energy consultant now, especially now, because it's such a big story and it throws up so much into the air, because it looked like the upcoming election cycle would put us on a path for the left, for the right, and then it would be settled from there and we'd know where the prices would go. So that was kind of the only risk. This is throwing all the rules that have been created by the agencies underneath the executive branch up in the air. So over 19,000 rules could be up in the air now because the Chevron deference has been struck down. This is a decades-old rule and basically gave agencies a lot of leeway to create rules from from not explicit mandates. So something, for example, and I'm using a little bit of hyperbole, but if you had the mandate, protect the environment, and then you come to the conclusion, get rid of all gas power cars and replace them with electric cars as, a way to protect the environment, because that wasn't spelled out by Congress, a lot of these rules are going to be challenged. So we could see a lot of the green energy push from the beginning of the administration being challenged that we've seen come out of the EPA, the DOE, the National Highway regarding the cars, and the Bureau of Land Management regarding the drilling. So a lot to come. The only thing is certain is the uncertainty that we see now, and making sure clients understand this, and we're staying on top of stories and explaining which way the stories will push prices. This is still a recently updated chart for what's actually contributing as fuel sources for electricity in the US. And the only difference from the old chart, solar and wind pretty much flat, maybe a little bit less coal coming off as quickly. And we know that year over year, when we looked at Q4 and we looked at Q2 and Q3 last year, only small percentages up and down. So we're not making the forecast of jumping by 5, 10, 15% year when it comes to renewables. PJM for capacity, pass-through is still a good option. The new rules have been put in place since below the yellow line, and we've seen those prices continue to come down. The one area that we've said to be cautious of is the DPL South in green. And currently the capacity auction are still tallying the results. It started last week. The bidding window closed on the 23rd, and we're expecting the results of the capacity auction on July 30th. But it's going to be rapid fire after here, because they have a lot of auctions to make up. Again, this is supposed to be a 3-year forward market, and those auctions have continued to be pushed back as new rules to accommodate all these green changes, especially have been factored in states protesting, and wanted to make sure that they were included in the auction. So we have a lot of them coming up, it kind of bolsters the PJM capacity pass-through strategy is at least something to investigate, especially if they're taking the extra steps of doing peak notifications to make sure the contract matches, or if they want to go further into the Mantis offerings, whether it's building management systems or other ways to reduce their capacity tag on site. Capacity pass-through is still a reasonable option for ICE in New England. We saw FC 18 come out slightly higher than the past two of 16 and 17, but in the range of where it was being priced in with the premiums. So no surprise there. And ICE New England has been running like a fine oiled machine for years when it comes to the capacity market. And they just threw that all up in the air because they've pushed back the next auction that was supposed to run in February of 25 all the way to February of 28, initially pushing it back to only 26. Now it's all the way out to 2028. And they're possibly, and they just unveiled over the past week, some ideas around making it a more short-term market, maybe a one-year forward market and then seasonally adjusted. So a lot more to come on that. The prices, though, are known through May 28. So out through there, definitely still good for that capacity pass-through option. Start going longer than that. It really kind of depends on your client. So please reach out if you want to discuss that more. Taking a look at weather, yes, we're pretty much through July right now, but wanted to keep these on here to take a look at the increase in temperatures along the eastern seaboard and over Texas, mid-Atlantic area. So on the May release, it's going to be hot. By June release for July, August, September, getting a lot hotter down the eastern seaboard and more of Texas. And it looks like the hottest is still to come. So this is the updated July forecast for August, September, and October. And we can see the Northeast is supposed to be likely above, getting real hot. All of Texas now covered in that darker orange and most of PJM. So that heat is expected to last through October. And this is what we're saying, well, long, warm summer. And then we have the ENSO changing. So that oscillation pattern has gone from El Nino, it's in neutral, and it's moving towards La Nina, which could also kick up hurricane storms and cause for a really cold winter. So we could go from hot to cold after kind of having some mild summers and not much of winters. So we really could see prices rip up, and in combination with the gas storage story, that starts moving down. These forecasts start coming true, which are currently the fundamentals before we start talking about polar blocking when we get closer. Could really be in for a 1-2 punch for prices and could see them rip sooner than later. So when we get to take a look at the markets and we're seeing some of them kind of on a July slide for the time being, might be a good time to lock in more, at least get some of that hedged in. For temperatures, been a little bit cooler up in ICE in New England. After that flurry of peak notifications, we've had some hot days early, unexpected, at least in the short term here. PJM getting a little bit warmer at the beginning of next week. And we'll keep an eye to see if that gets hotter and we'll need any peak notifications. And in Texas, getting hotter in midweek next week. So right now, while prices are low and prices are on a slide, great time to lock in, especially since the price pullback, because those hot temperatures come around again, we could see them move right back up. Taking a look at market data, might say this a couple of times, but if we say pretty flat, that means less than a quarter cent or quarter mil difference. And ICE in New England had a pretty flat week for prices after we kind of saw a drop from last week. So taking a look at balance of the year using August to December, ICE in New England balance is pretty flat. So again, underneath a quarter mil of movement and still a little bit closer to the 52-week average. One of the things though with ICE in New England, unlike the other electricity markets, we kind of still have that straight line coming up off those February lows. It's made pop on some of the news stories, and we had that heat flash before price temperatures kind of cooled down. So keeping an eye on those LMPs. We also had August go down, which is why, I mean, part of that drop here too, because July has been okay for the LM prices relatively so far. Taking a look at calendar year 25 price in New England, again, pretty flat, less week to week. Still a little bit above that 52-week average, and similar to 24, still that kind of straight line up from the mid-February lows. And winter is going to be coming into focus sooner than later. So making sure we take advantage of those prices and using the monthly bar chart to talk about, I mean, this winter we have prices at 12.5. And I mean, when we had that big spike before we went into the winter of 22 and 23, they were getting close to 30 cents. So, I mean, 3 times what they were now. So they have a lot of room to run up. They obviously can come down some more, but the upside, downside, that's what we're talking with the black and red arrows on the gas charts. Algonquin was pretty flat week to week for balance of the year, close to that 52-week low. And calendar year 25, pretty flat week to week, but we're seeing with the gas, not for the outside years, not coming off as sharply. And mostly that's due to August and a little bit of downward movement for December for the balance of the year. PJM, similar story for electricity, pretty flat week to week after we've kind of seen August and September, October come off a little, November, December kind of move up a little bit. So balance of the year, August, December was pretty flat week to week, again, underneath the quarter mil movement, still just above the 52-week average, still below just the 52-week average. And that's kind of been the story of PJM is it just hits the high, back to the average, hits the high, back to the average. So this pattern continues, could be a good time to pick it up here. Again, a lot of this movement down was due to August dropping off before we get there, but he could be just around the corner and is forecasted. They also have a smaller y-axis, so the vertical axis going down, it shows the range of prices isn't as big as the other areas of ERCOT and ICE New England. PJM calendar year 25 was off a half mil week to week, getting close to the midpoint of the 52-week low and average. So getting a little bit of break from selling above that 52-week average point could be a good time to lock in at least a piece here. Again, the rest of the hot summer and cold winter is what we have in front of us. And then the question of which way does policy go with the upcoming election. Looking at PJM gas using TETCO M3, balance of the year was pretty flat week to week, so under a quarter cent of movement. Now just above 52-week low. So we had the February lows for most of gas and electric. Gas for most part is pretty much around those 52-week lows right now for the balance of the year, because again, August kind of sagging off a little bit in the shoulder season months. Calendar year 25, hit close to the low. But is up a half cent week to week, still close to the low, but kind of bouncing back up quicker than what's right in front of us. And moving over to ERCOT, I want to keep this chart in here because, I mean, these prices, it was at 11.4 recently. It reached a high around 14.4. Now it's down into the sevens. So we've seen August drop off sharply, and that's partially because of that balance of the year price down. It's pulled down a little bit of the next August's of August 25, August 26. But unless your client starts the term in August, right, that's not going to have a big impact to you on the other months moving. So here's just the chart in regular format showing the height. Taking a look at ERCOT, Houston was off a half mil week to week, still a little closer to the midpoint of 52-week average and low. So big slide here, mostly due to August and September coming off, but mostly due to August. So it doesn't tell the whole story, because when we look at calendar year 25 for ERCOT was up 1 mil week to week, now getting close to that 52-week high in 52-week high in average midpoint. So it had the slides kind of rebounding again. A lot of summer left, a lot of heat still forecasted. Taking a look at Houston Ship Channel for ERCOT gas, up a half cent week to week, now slightly above the 52-week low. And similar story for calendar year 25, Houston Ship Channel, up a half cent week to week. Again, this slide for these were bigger than the other areas, a little further past those February lows. Great time to take advantage of gas across all of our markets. And we know that Houston Ship Channel, Henry Hub, pretty similar shape and price because they're neighbors, but we're also looking at the basis between our different areas. And we're looking at ICE in New England being the blue line. We're looking at the space between the blue and the gray on the left versus the blue and the gray on the right. When these are closer together, it's a great time to at least lock in the basis, if not more. This story holds up in Houston Ship Channel as well, but not as popular down there. So just taking a look through PJM, usually, and if we went back years, you'd usually just see the red above the gray. And really since last spring, summer, we've seen the red starting trending below the gray. So it's actually a negative wholesale basis. By the time you get your weighted retail price, usually comes out positive. But what a great time to lock in PJM gas. Taking a look going out in the future, we had 25 pretty flat, 26 off a half mil, 27 off a mil and a half, 28 big move, 3 mils. That could be a quick move, and then the outer years off around a mil. So seeing these shapes change. Part of it can be from, who might be making policy on those outside years. So we're seeing those move up and down more frequently than usual. And these are the charts, really the easiest way to talk about a few different years, talk about the last time you bought, whether you locked in something when prices before kind of the current administration, the Russia-Ukraine starts, and then all the other global issues and kind of the new transition towards green. The height of that before the really warm winter, that all coming down. And obviously, since the cold winter was in front of us with the problem for Europe maybe needing gas, that's when 24 spiked before the year started. But the outside years, that might not be the problem, so it didn't respond as much, right? Now we're starting to see, as we go out, where could you buy now? So also you could say some of the people looking for ETFs, you bought up here, we can blend you lower. Taking a look at PGM going out into the future, we have 25 off a half mil, 26 through 28 off a mil and a half, and the outer years off around a mil. So these prices have come down from that side we were talking about, but we're still going on that straight kind of diagonal line up into the future. And a lot of that has to do with whether coal plants are going to be part of the supply picture in the future for PJM. So very important story that we keep an eye on. Now, opposite to the ice in New England story, because the cold winter was in front of us and the issue with getting gas to Europe, the story around the coal plants was for the future years. So as soon as that story came out, we saw the furthest year out that we have on this graph, 27 spiked the highest, followed by 26, and not as much for, 25. So just applying when you hear stories, whether it's for future years or something right in front of us, that's kind of how it's going to send the market and hedge around that. And hybrid strategy is a great way to do that. Then taking a look at ERCOT out into the future, we had 25 through 28 up around a mil. Outer years mostly up a half mil to a mil. We got 25 about a mil and a half above 2026 right now. And so we have kind of had a break. Texas ERCOT's been a little tougher because the prices for all the future years were getting close to the old spike. We've got a little bit of a pullback now, but still plenty of room to run up, especially if the energy emergency alerts start getting issued here at the end of July or in August. Then just some points to consider. Nothing really new here. We're managing the risk by evaluating how high or low the market can go from here, and that's the red of the black arrows. Whether you want to use confidence intervals or talk through one of the line charts, evaluating the longer terms to see if there's some value because of what could happen. Now, it might be these longer terms you don't lock as much in. Maybe do the fixed data with more to do with locking in the first and second year, and the third year leaving more of that open until the election is decided. And then really being able to explain why summer rates look a lot cheaper than a 12-month rate in PJM or ICE in New England. Just use those monthly bar charts should dispel that idea very quickly. It's because the most expensive months of the year are not included in the summer rate. And it goes vice versa for ERCOT, where the most expensive rates are during the summer and then they go down during the winter. And right now we have future beforehand, we kind of were at a higher point. We got a little bit of a July slide, so a little bit of advantage here instead of just continually getting hotter going into a cold winter for prices. We have future prices for electricity, mostly closer to the 52-week average, so a little bit of room there. But we have gas prices near at the 52-week low, so a great time to lock those in, especially with the forecasted hot into summer and start of fall that is expected. And we see from actions taken on Monday, the whole government push to go clean and green continues. We're also worried about, if it's not executed well and we continue to shut supply of fossil fuels, will we have enough? With the background story of AI demand going to really drive up electricity consumption, besides the possible electrification of buildings and the use of EVs. And lastly, differentiating the different price components, talking about the fixed adder and really concentrating on capacity, or at least locking that fixed adder to, in most states, protect you from that uplift of the REC state compliance bucket. So thank you for everyone for attending. For our channel partners, please reach out to your account manager.